I thought I knew my family. Growing up in the Woodson mansion in Greenwich, Connecticut, surrounded by old money and older secrets, I believed our biggest problem was deciding which charity gala to attend. I was wrong. Dead wrong. My name is Robert Woodson, and at 22, in my final semester at Yale, I thought my life was perfectly mapped out. Graduate, join a family investment firm, marry someone from our social circle, and continue the Woodson legacy. But everything I thought I knew about my family, about my future, about myself, crumbled the day I found that document hidden in my grandmother's closet 3 months after her funeral. What I discovered didn't just change my inheritance, it changed everything. But before we begin, leave a like, subscribe to the channel, and tell us where you're listening from. The morning mist clung to the manicured lawns of our Greenwich estate as I packed my Mercedes for what I thought would be just another routine trip home from Yale. It was mid-April, and the Connecticut spring was painting everything in soft pastels that matched the carefully curated aesthetic my mother, Victoria Woodson, maintained throughout our 12-bedroom colonial mansion. I should have known something was off the moment I walked through the front door. The house felt different, quieter, somehow heavier. It had been 3 months since grandmother Eleanor's funeral, but her presence still lingered in every corner, from the antique Persian rugs she'd collected during her travels to the fresh white orchids she insisted be replaced weekly in the grand foyer. "Robert, darling, you're early," my mother called from the sitting room, her voice carrying that particular strain I'd noticed more frequently since the funeral. She emerged wearing her standard uniform, Chanel suit, pearls, and that smile that never quite reached her eyes. "Traffic was lighter than expected," I replied, setting down my weekend bag. "Where's Dad?" "Conference call with the Singapore office. You know how it is." She smoothed an invisible wrinkle from her jacket. "I was just going through some of Eleanor's things. There's still so much to sort through." My father, Charles Woodson III, had built our family's investment firm into a multi-billion-dollar operation, but lately he seemed more interested in expanding internationally than dealing with the emotional aftermath of losing his mother. Not that I blamed him. The Woodson men weren't exactly known for processing grief. "Need any help?" I offered, though we both knew I was just being polite. My parents had made it clear that handling Eleanor's estate was adult business, not something for a college senior to worry about. "That's sweet, but unnecessary. Your father and I have everything under control." She paused, studying my face with the calculating look she usually reserved for charity board meetings. "Actually, there's something we should discuss. About Eleanor's will." My stomach dropped slightly. Ever since the funeral, there had been hushed conversations behind closed doors, legal meetings I wasn't invited to, and a general sense that something important was being kept from me. As Eleanor's only grandchild, I naturally assumed I'd inherit something significant, maybe her art collection or a trust fund. But every time I brought it up, my parents deflected. "What about it?" Victoria's smile grew tighter. "Well, darling, you know how eccentric Eleanor could be, especially toward the end. The doctors said the medication for her heart condition might have affected her judgment." I frowned. My grandmother had been sharp as a tack right up until her heart attack. Sure, she'd been more outspoken about family matters in her final months, but confused? Never. "She left everything to charity," my mother continued, her words coming out in a careful rush. "The house, the investments, even her jewelry. She felt it was the right thing to do, given the family's fortunate position." The words hit me like a physical blow. Everything. It didn't make sense. Eleanor had always talked about family legacy, about preserving what the Woodsons had built. She'd specifically mentioned wanting me to have her father's pocket watch, the one he'd carried when he started the family's first business venture in 1892. "Everything." I managed to ask. "I know it's disappointing, sweetheart, but you have to understand, Eleanor wasn't thinking clearly those last few months. The grief from losing your grandfather, the medications, her age, it all added up." Victoria reached out and squeezed my shoulder. "Besides, you don't need an inheritance. You'll have your position at the firm, and eventually, you'll inherit from your father and me." But that wasn't the point. It wasn't about the money. Our family had plenty. It was about connection, about Eleanor choosing to leave me something that represented our bond. We'd spent countless hours together over the years, talking about everything from business philosophy to her stories about traveling through Europe in the 1960s. Had all of that meant nothing to her? "Can I see the will?" I asked. Something flickered across my mother's face, too quick to identify, but definitely there. "Of course, darling. It's with the lawyers. Naturally. I'll have them send you a copy." "What about her personal effects? Photo albums, letters, things like that?" "Most of it went to charity as well. You know Eleanor. She never liked clutter." Victoria glanced at her Cartier watch. "Listen, why don't you get settled in your room? I'll have Maria prepare lunch, and we can talk more later. Your father should be free by then." As I climbed the familiar staircase to my childhood bedroom, something nagged at me. Eleanor hate clutter? The woman who kept every birthday card I'd ever given her, who had boxes of family photographs dating back to the Civil War, who collected vintage books like some people collected stamps. It didn't add up. My room remained exactly as I'd left it, a shrine to my high school achievements that felt increasingly foreign each time I returned from college. Rowing trophies, debate team plaques, and photos with friends whose names I could barely remember anymore lined the shelves. This was supposed to be home, but lately it felt more like a museum exhibit. The Privileged American Teenager, circa 2018 to 2022. I collapsed onto my childhood bed and pulled out my phone, scrolling through old text messages with Eleanor. She'd been surprisingly tech-savvy for someone in her 80s, often sending me articles about current events or photos of her garden. The last message, sent just 2 weeks before she died, was a photo of her prized rose garden with the caption, "Thinking of our conversation about legacy, Bobby. Some things are worth preserving, no matter what others think." Legacy. The word stuck with me as I stared at the ceiling, listening to the familiar sounds of our house. The grandfather clock in the hallway, the subtle hum of the central air system, the distant sound of Maria preparing lunch in the kitchen. What legacy was Eleanor referring to? And why did my mother's explanation feel like such a carefully rehearsed performance? I decided to let it go, at least for now. Maybe I was reading too much into things. Grief did strange things to people, and perhaps Eleanor really had changed her mind about leaving me anything. It hurt, but families were complicated. I'd learned that much growing up in one where appearances mattered more than emotions. But as I lay there, one thought kept circling back. Eleanor had never liked making decisions without explaining her reasoning. She'd spent years teaching me about the importance of clear communication in business and personal relationships. Would she really give away everything without at least writing me a letter explaining why? The question followed me through lunch with my parents, where the conversation carefully avoided any mention of Eleanor or her estate. It followed me through dinner, where we discussed my upcoming graduation and my summer internship at the firm. And it followed me to bed that night, where I lay awake staring at the ceiling, wondering why the people who were supposed to love me most felt like strangers. The next morning, I woke to the sound of hushed voices drifting up from the kitchen. My parents were early risers, but there was something urgent in their tone that made me pause at the top of the stairs instead of heading down for breakfast. "Told you this would be a problem," my father was saying, his voice carrying the sharp edge it got during particularly stressful business calls. "Robert's not suspicious," my mother replied, but even from a distance, I could hear the uncertainty. He accepted the explanation. "For now. But you know how he is, too much like Eleanor. He won't let this go forever." My chest tightened. They were talking about me, about Eleanor's will, and clearly, there was more to the story than they'd let on. "Maybe we should have told him the truth from the beginning," Victoria said, the words barely audible. "Absolutely not. You know what that would mean for the family, for the business. Some secrets are worth keeping." Secrets. My family was keeping secrets about Eleanor's will, and whatever the truth was, it was significant enough to make my usually unflappable father nervous. I crept back to my room, my mind racing. What could be so damaging that they'd lie to me about my own grandmother's final wishes? I spent the morning trying to act normal, joining my parents for breakfast and making small talk about my classes and summer plans. But I was studying them now, looking for tells, the way Eleanor had taught me to read people during our chess games. My mother's laugh was too bright, her questions about my social life too interested. My father kept checking his phone, his jaw tight with tension. After breakfast, I announced I was going for a run, a normal enough activity that wouldn't raise suspicions. But instead of heading to the usual trail through our neighborhood, I doubled back through the woods that bordered our property and slipped in through the kitchen entrance while my parents were occupied with their respective phone calls. Eleanor's room had been at the far end of the second floor, overlooking her beloved rose garden. My parents had mentioned cleaning it out, but when I pushed open the door, most of her belongings were still there. The room smelled faintly of her perfume, Chanel No. 5, the same scent she'd worn for as long as I could remember. I stood in the doorway, overwhelmed by the familiarity of it all. Her reading chair by the window, still positioned to catch the morning light. Her mahogany desk, where she'd written countless letters to friends and charitable organizations. The bookshelf filled with first editions and family photographs. If she'd really left everything to charity, why hadn't it been cleared out yet? I moved carefully through the room, unsure what I was looking for, but certain I'd know it when I found it. Her desk drawers were mostly empty, probably cleaned out by my parents or the lawyers. The bookshelf yielded nothing but books and dust. I was about to give up when I noticed something odd about her walk-in closet. Eleanor had been a small woman, but she'd had an extensive wardrobe built up over decades of social events and travel. The closet was deep, with built-in drawers and shelves that extended back further than seemed necessary. As I moved aside some of her dresses, pieces my mother had apparently overlooked in her cleaning, I noticed that the back wall didn't quite line up with the dimensions of the room. My heart started beating faster as I ran my hands along the wood paneling. There, a section that felt different, slightly raised. I pressed against it, and to my amazement, a small panel swung inward, revealing a hidden compartment about the size of a shoebox. Inside were documents, photographs, and what appeared to be a thick manila envelope with last will and testament of Eleanor Catherine Woodson, written in my grandmother's distinctive handwriting. My hand shook as I pulled it out, along with a sealed letter addressed to me in the same elegant script. I sat on Eleanor's bedroom floor, surrounded by the afternoon sunlight streaming through her windows, and opened the letter first. My dearest Bobby, if you're reading this, it means I've passed away and that you've been clever enough to find what I knew you'd eventually look for. I'm proud of you for that. It shows you have the curiosity and determination that will serve you well in life. I'm afraid your parents have lied to you about my will. They mean well, in their way, but they've always been more concerned with maintaining appearances than facing difficult truths. The real will is with this letter, and I think you'll understand why they prefer to hide it. I've left the majority of my estate to you, Bobby, but not in the way you might expect. Along with a substantial trust fund that will mature on your 25th birthday, I'm leaving you something much more valuable and much more dangerous: the truth about our family. My hands were trembling now as I continued reading. The documents in this compartment detail a series of investments and business decisions your father and grandfather made over the past 20 years. Decisions that, while not technically illegal, would destroy the family's reputation and possibly lead to criminal charges if they became public. I discovered them by accident while reviewing some old financial records, and I've been wrestling with what to do about them ever since. I'm leaving this burden to you because I believe you have the integrity to handle it properly. Your parents chose to hide the real will because it would have forced them to confront these issues immediately. They convinced themselves that keeping you in the dark was protecting you, but I disagree. You deserve to know what kind of legacy you're inheriting. The choice of what to do with this information is yours, Bobby. You can expose the truth and likely destroy everything our family has built, or you can find a way to make things right without destroying innocent people in the process. I trust your judgment more than I trust anyone else's. Remember, wealth built on deception is no wealth at all. But a family that chooses to face its mistakes together can overcome anything. All my love, Grandmother Eleanor. P.S. Your grandfather's pocket watch is in the small jewelry box on my dressing table. I would never forget such a promise. I set the letter aside with shaking hands and opened the will. It was exactly as Eleanor had described. I was inheriting the bulk of her estate, including the house, her investment portfolio, and a trust fund worth more than I'd ever imagined. But attached to the will were dozens of documents that made my stomach turn. financial records showing systematic tax evasion, correspondence about bribing foreign officials to secure favorable investment deals, evidence of securities fraud that had cost other investors millions. And at the center of it all, my father's signature on document after document, approving transactions that were morally bankrupt and possibly criminal. I sat there for what felt like hours, trying to process what I was reading. This was my family, the people who'd raised me, who'd taught me about responsibility and integrity. How could they have built our comfortable life on such a foundation? The sound of voices in the hallway snapped me back to the present. My parents were coming upstairs, their conversation growing louder as they approached. "Check on Robert. He's been quiet today," my mother was saying. I quickly gathered all the documents, stuffing them back into the envelope along with Eleanor's letter. My heart pounded as I heard footsteps pause outside Eleanor's door. "Is someone in there?" My father's voice, sharp with suspicion. I had seconds to decide. Hide in the closet and hope they didn't search thoroughly or face them with what I'd found. But I wasn't ready for that conversation, not yet. I needed time to think, to plan, to figure out what Eleanor had really wanted me to do with this information. I slipped into the en-suite bathroom just as the bedroom door opened, clutching the envelope against my chest and praying they wouldn't notice the disturbed dust patterns in the closet or the slightly out-of-place dresses. "Robert," my mother called. "Are you in here, sweetheart?" I held my breath, listening to their footsteps as they moved around the room. After what felt like an eternity, I heard my father say, "He must be still out running. Come on, we should finish going through these boxes." Only after their voices faded down the hallway did I allow myself to breathe again. I was trapped in Eleanor's bathroom, holding evidence that could destroy my family, with no idea what to do next. But one thing was certain: my comfortable, privileged life as I'd known it was over. The only question now was what would rise from its ashes. I waited another 20 minutes before creeping out of Eleanor's bathroom, the envelope clutched against my chest like a shield. The house had fallen quiet again. My parents had apparently moved their sorting to another room, or perhaps gone downstairs for lunch. I made it back to my bedroom without encountering anyone, but the familiar space now felt like a cage. Sitting on my bed, I spread Eleanor's documents across my comforter, trying to organize them chronologically. The pattern that emerged made me sick to my stomach. What had started as minor tax avoidance strategies in the early 2000s had escalated into increasingly serious crimes. By 2019, my father was actively laundering money through offshore shell companies and bribing foreign officials to secure investment opportunities that should have gone to legitimate competitors. The most damning document was a recorded conversation transcript from just last year. My father, speaking with someone identified only as KL, discussing a bribe to a Southeast Asian government official that would give Woodson Investments exclusive access to a lucrative infrastructure project. "The beauty of it," my father's words read, "is that even if someone investigates, the money trail leads nowhere. These people will never talk, and the paper trail is impeccable. We've been doing this for 20 years without a single problem." 20 years. That meant this had been going on since I was a toddler. My entire childhood, every family vacation, every private school tuition payment, every advantage I'd been given, all of it had been funded by criminal activity. I picked up my phone 3 times to call someone, but who? My roommate at Yale? My girlfriend, Sarah? What'd I even say? "Hey, I just discovered my family's been running criminal enterprises for 2 decades. Any advice?" The weight of Eleanor's letter pressed on me. She'd trusted me with this burden, believing I had the integrity to handle it. But what did handling it even mean? If I went to the authorities, my parents would likely face federal charges. Our family's assets would be frozen, and the scandal would destroy not just my parents, but everyone who worked for Woodson Investments. Hundreds of employees who had nothing to do with my father's crimes would lose their jobs. But if I stayed silent, I'd be complicit in ongoing criminal activity. Every day, I kept this secret. More people could be hurt by my father's actions. A soft knock on my door made me scramble to hide the documents under my pillow. "Robert," my mother's voice, gentler now. "May I come in?" "Sure, Mom." She entered wearing a different outfit, casual slacks and a silk blouse that somehow made her look younger and more vulnerable. In her hands was a small leather jewelry box that I recognized immediately. "I found this in Eleanor's room," she said, sitting on the edge of my bed. "I thought you might want it." She opened the box to reveal my great-grandfather's pocket watch, its gold surface worn smooth by generations of Woodson hands. The inscription was still legible: "To Charles Woodson, Sr., for integrity in business and character in life. 1892. The irony was devastating. "She left me this?" I asked, taking the watch carefully. "It was on her dressing table with a note. She wanted you to have it." Victoria's eyes were softer than I'd seen them in months. "I know you're disappointed about the will, sweetheart, but Eleanor did love you very much." Looking at my mother now, I could see the strain she was under. There were lines around her eyes that hadn't been there at Christmas, and her hands trembled slightly as she smoothed her slacks. She was suffering too, carrying the weight of whatever secrets my family was hiding. "Mom," I said carefully, "what really happened with Eleanor's will?" Her composure cracked slightly. "What do you mean?" "I mean, it doesn't make sense. Eleanor was sharp until the end, and she never made major decisions without explaining them. Did she really leave everything to charity without even writing me a letter?" Victoria was quiet for a long moment, staring at the pocket watch in my hands. When she finally spoke, her voice was barely a whisper. "Your grandmother discovered some things about our family business that upset her greatly. Things that happened before you were born, decisions your father made that she disagreed with." She looked up at me, and I saw fear in her eyes. "She threatened to go public with information that would have destroyed everything we've built." My heart hammered against my chest, but I kept my expression neutral. "What kind of information?" "I can't. Robert, you have to understand, your father never meant for things to go as far as they did. It started small, just some aggressive tax strategies that everyone in our position uses. But the business world is competitive, and sometimes—" She trailed off, unable to finish the sentence. "Sometimes you have to break the law to succeed," I supplied. Victoria flinched. "It's not that simple. You don't understand the pressures, the expectations. Your great-grandfather built this family's reputation on integrity, but he never had to compete in the global market we face today. Things are different now. Different enough to justify criminal activity." The question hung between us like a blade. My mother's face went pale, and I realized I'd pushed too hard, revealed too much of what I knew. "Robert," she said slowly, "what exactly are you asking me?" This was it, the moment where I either came clean about what I'd found or continued the charade. But looking at my mother's frightened face, I realized that confronting my parents now, when I was still processing everything myself, would be a mistake. I needed time to think, to plan, to figure out the right way forward. "I'm asking if there's more to Eleanor's will situation than you're telling me," I said, trying to sound naive rather than accusatory. Victoria relaxed slightly. "Eleanor was difficult in her final months. She made some accusations that weren't entirely fair, and she used her will as a weapon to try to force your father to make changes to the business that would have been catastrophic. We're challenging the will legally, but these things take time." It was a plausible story, the kind of family drama that happened in wealthy families all the time. If I hadn't found the real will in Eleanor's letter, I might have believed it. "So, there's a chance I might inherit something after all?" "There's always a chance, sweetheart, but you shouldn't count on it. Focus on your future, on building your own success." She stood up, smoothing her slacks again. "I should let you rest. I know this has been a lot to process." After she left, I sat holding the pocket watch, feeling the weight of 4 generations of Woodson history. My great-grandfather had earned this watch through integrity. My grandfather had apparently maintained that standard. But somewhere along the way, my father had decided that family legacy mattered less than family wealth. I opened my laptop and began researching federal whistleblower protections, securities fraud statutes, and foreign bribery laws. If I was going to honor Eleanor's trust in me, I needed to understand exactly what my father had done and what options I had for addressing it. The more I read, the clearer it became that my father's crimes weren't minor infractions. They were serious federal offenses that could result in decades in prison. But the whistleblower process was complex, and once I started it, there would be no going back. As the sun set over the Connecticut countryside, painting Eleanor's rose garden in golden light, I made a decision. I wouldn't confront my parents yet, and I wouldn't go to the authorities immediately. Instead, I would return to Yale, finish my senior year, and use that time to carefully plan my next move. Eleanor had trusted me to handle this burden wisely, and I owed it to her, and to myself, to get it right. But as I packed the documents carefully back into their envelope, I couldn't shake the feeling that my family's secrets wouldn't stay hidden much longer. Change was coming, whether we were ready for it or not. Back at Yale, I threw myself into my senior thesis with an intensity that surprised even my advisor. My topic, Ethics in International Business, a case study in corporate responsibility, had seemed academically interesting when I'd chosen it months ago. Now, every source I read felt like it was written specifically about my family situation. I spent hours in Sterling Memorial Library, surrounded by case studies of corporate whistleblowers, SEC investigations, and international corruption scandals. Each story followed a similar pattern. Someone discovers wrongdoing, faces an agonizing decision about whether to come forward, and then deals with the consequences, which were rarely positive for anyone involved. My girlfriend Sarah noticed the change in my behavior immediately. "You've been different since you came back from Greenwich," she said one evening as we sat in our usual booth at Maury's, the traditional Yale tavern where we'd shared countless meals over the past 3 years. Distant, preoccupied. Sarah Wellington came from old Massachusetts money, the kind of family that had been wealthy so long they'd forgotten what it felt like to worry about anything. Her father was a federal judge. Her mother served on the boards of several prestigious nonprofits, and Sarah herself was headed to Harvard Law School in the fall. We'd been together since sophomore year, and I'd always assumed we'd eventually marry and combine our family fortunes in the traditional way. But now, looking at her across the candlelit table, I realized how impossible that future had become. How could I marry someone whose father was a federal judge when my own father was a criminal? Just stressed about graduation, I guess, I said, pushing my food around my plate. "Robert." Sarah's voice carried the no-nonsense tone she used when she thought someone was being evasive. She was planning to specialize in white-collar criminal defense, and she had an uncanny ability to spot deception. "Something's wrong. Really wrong. You can tell me." The temptation was enormous. Sarah was brilliant. She understood complex legal issues, and she genuinely cared about me. If anyone could help me figure out the right path forward, it would be her. But she was also ambitious, career-focused, and deeply connected to the same social circles as my family. If I told her the truth, I'd be putting her in an impossible position. At best, she'd feel obligated to distance herself from me. At worst, she might feel legally or ethically required to report what I'd told her. "I found out some things about my family that are complicated," I said carefully. "I'm still trying to figure out what to do about them." Sarah leaned forward, her expression sharpening. "What kind of things?" "The kind that could change everything." She studied my face for a long moment, and I could see her analytical mind working. "Robert, if your family's involved in something illegal, you need to—" "I need to think," I interrupted more sharply than I'd intended. "I need to understand all the implications before I make any decisions that can't be undone. But if people are being hurt, I don't know if anyone's being hurt." The words came out louder than I meant, drawing looks from other diners. I lowered my voice. "I'm sorry. I need to handle this my own way." Sarah sat back, and I could see her retreating into the careful politeness she used when she was hurt or angry. Of course, I didn't mean to pry. The rest of dinner passed in uncomfortable silence. As we walked back toward campus, Sarah finally spoke again. "You know, my father always says that the hardest cases are the ones where good people have to choose between loyalty and justice." I stopped walking. "What does he say about how to make that choice?" "He says you look at who gets hurt either way, and you choose the path that protects the most innocent people." She turned to face me, her expression serious. "But he also says that the people who love you will understand why you had to make the hard choice, even if it hurts them initially." That night, alone in my dorm room, I called my father. It was past 10 o'clock, but I knew he'd still be awake. He rarely slept more than 5 hours a night, claiming that successful people didn't have time for rest. Robert, good to hear from you, son. How are classes going? Fine, Dad. I've been thinking about our conversation last weekend about joining the firm after graduation. Excellent. I've already spoken to the partners about bringing you in as an analyst. You'll start in our international division. Great opportunity to learn the business from the ground up. The international division, where most of the criminal activity seemed to be centered. Actually, I was wondering if I could learn more about our overseas operations before I start. Get familiar with our major projects, our key relationships. There was a pause on the other end of the line. That's very thorough of you, Robert. But you don't need to worry about the complex stuff yet. You'll have plenty of time to learn once you're working full-time. I just want to be prepared. Maybe I could review some case studies, see how we've handled major international deals in the past. Another pause, longer this time. Robert, is there something specific you're asking about? My pulse quickened. I was walking into dangerous territory, but I needed to know more about what my father was currently involved in. Eleanor's documents were from 2019 and earlier. If the criminal activity was ongoing, I needed to understand its scope. I'm just eager to contribute meaningfully, I said. In my thesis research, I've been reading about international business challenges, and I thought it might be helpful to see how Woodson Investments has navigated those issues successfully. Your thesis research. My father's tone had shifted, becoming more careful. What exactly is your thesis about? Corporate ethics in international business. I'm examining how successful companies maintain their values while operating in challenging global markets. The silence that followed was deafening. When my father finally spoke, his voice was controlled but cold. Robert, I think you should focus on your academic work and let the professionals handle the business side of things. There are aspects of international operations that are complex and confidential, not appropriate for academic discussion. Of course, Dad. I wasn't planning to write about our company specifically. Good, because that would be highly inappropriate and potentially damaging to ongoing business relationships. His voice softened slightly, but the warning was clear. Son, I know you're eager to prove yourself, but the business world isn't like your college courses. Some things are better learned through experience than through research. After we hung up, I sat staring at my phone, realizing that my father suspected something. My questions had been too pointed, too specific. If he started investigating how much I knew, it wouldn't take long for him to discover that Eleanor's room hadn't been as thoroughly cleaned as they'd thought. I needed to make a decision soon, before my family realized what I'd found and took steps to protect themselves. But I also needed more information about their current activities. If the criminal behavior had stopped, that would change my calculation entirely. The next morning, I made a decision that would have been unthinkable just weeks earlier. I called my father's office and asked to speak with his assistant, Mrs. Chun, who had worked for the family for over 15 years. Robert, how lovely to hear from you. How is your final semester going? Very well, thank you. Mrs. Chun, I was wondering if you could help me with something. I'm putting together a graduation gift for my father, a photo album of his major business achievements over the years. Could you possibly send me some information about his most significant deals, especially the recent international projects he's been so proud of? Mrs. Chun was delighted to help, and within hours, my email contained a treasure trove of information about Woodson Investments' current operations. As I read through project summaries, client lists, and financial projections, my heart sank. The criminal activity wasn't historical. It was ongoing and extensive. My father's firm was currently involved in at least 6 different schemes involving bribery, money laundering, and securities fraud. The scope was breathtaking, and the potential damage to investors and foreign economies was massive. Eleanor had been right to be horrified, but she'd also been right to trust me with this burden, because now I understood something that changed everything. This wasn't just about my family anymore. People were being hurt right now, today, by my father's actions, and as long as I stayed silent, I was helping to hurt them. The choice Eleanor had hoped I'd make was becoming clear, but the cost would be everything I'd ever known or loved. 3 weeks before graduation, I made an appointment with a lawyer in New Haven who specialized in federal whistleblower cases. Margaret Rodriguez had represented several high-profile corporate whistleblowers, and according to her website, She understood the personal cost of doing the right thing in impossible situations. Her office was in a converted brownstone near the Yale campus, deliberately understated but professionally appointed. Rodriguez herself was in her 50s, with silver-streaked hair and the kind of direct gaze that suggested she'd seen every variation of human moral compromise. "Mr. Woodson," she said, gesturing for me to sit across from her desk. "Your call intrigued me. It's not often I hear from someone in your position." I'd been deliberately vague on the phone, saying only that I had information about potential federal crimes involving a family member. Now, sitting in her office, I realized how surreal the situation was. 6 months ago, my biggest worry had been choosing between law school and business school. Now, I was contemplating destroying my own family. "I need to understand my options," I said, "and I need to understand them confidentially." Of course, attorney-client privilege applies from the moment you walk in here, whether or not you ultimately retain my services. She leaned back in her chair. "Why don't you tell me what you've discovered?" I spent the next hour walking her through Eleanor's documents, the evidence I'd found, and the additional information I'd gathered about ongoing criminal activity. Rodriguez listened without interruption, occasionally making notes, but never showing surprise or judgment. When I finished, she was quiet for several minutes, reviewing her notes. "This is substantial," she finally said. "Securities fraud, foreign bribery, money laundering, tax evasion. We're talking about potential RICO charges here. Federal prosecutors would be very interested in this information. What would happen to my father? If convicted on all charges, he'd be looking at significant prison time, possibly 20 to 30 years. The financial penalties would likely bankrupt the company and freeze family assets, pending investigation." The numbers hit me like physical blows. My father was 58 years old. A 20-year sentence would essentially be a life sentence. What about my mother? She's not directly involved in the business operations. That depends on what she knew and when she knew it. If she was aware of the criminal activity and helped conceal it, she could face charges as well. Conspiracy, obstruction of justice, potentially money laundering if she benefited from the proceeds. I thought about my mother's frightened face when she tried to explain Eleanor's will, her obvious knowledge that something was terribly wrong. She might not have made the criminal decisions, but she'd certainly help cover them up. "There's another option," Rodriguez continued. "Cooperation with federal authorities often results in reduced sentences, especially for family members who weren't the primary actors. If your parents were willing to fully cooperate with an investigation, provide testimony against other parties involved, and make restitution for the damages." "How reduced?" "It varies, but we might be looking at 5 to 10 years instead of 20 to 30. Still significant, but survivable." I stared out her office window at the Yale campus, where students were enjoying the spring afternoon, blissfully unaware that their classmate was contemplating destroying his own family. The weight of Eleanor's pocket watch seemed heavier in my jacket pocket. What about the employees? The people who work for Woodson Investments who had nothing to do with this? That's always a concern in these cases. When a company is built on criminal proceeds, the legitimate employees often suffer the most. They lose their jobs, their retirement savings if it's invested in company stock, sometimes their professional reputations by association. "How many people work for your father's firm?" "About 300, I said quietly. "Most of them have been there for years. Some have been there their whole careers." Rodriguez nodded sympathetically. "It's not fair to them. But the alternative is allowing ongoing criminal activity to continue, which hurts even more people. The investors being defrauded, the foreign populations being exploited, the competitors being illegally shut out of legitimate business opportunities. Is there any way to, I don't know, force my father to stop without involving federal authorities? You could try confronting him directly, but based on what you've told me about your family dynamics, I doubt that would be effective. People don't engage in this level of criminal activity for 20 years and then stop because a family member asks them to." She paused. "There's also the risk that confronting him would give him time to destroy evidence or flee the country. My father would never flee. Mr. Woodson, your father has been living a double life for 2 decades. He's systematically defrauded investors and corrupted foreign officials while maintaining the appearance of a respectable businessman. Are you certain you know what he would or wouldn't do when faced with federal prison? The question hung in the air like a challenge. How well did I really know my father? I'd seen him as a successful businessman, a devoted family man, someone who'd built our comfortable life through hard work and intelligence. But the evidence suggested a completely different person, someone capable of elaborate deception and moral compromise on a massive scale. If I decide to come forward, I said finally, what would the process look like? First, we'd arrange a proffer session with federal prosecutors, essentially a meeting where you present your evidence and they evaluate whether it's sufficient for prosecution. If they're interested, you'd likely need to wear a wire for additional conversations with your father to gather more evidence. A wire? The thought made me nauseous. It's standard procedure. The documents you have are substantial, but prosecutors typically want recorded evidence of ongoing criminal activity for the strongest possible case. I imagined sitting across from my father at dinner, pretending everything was normal while recording him discussing criminal activity. The betrayal felt overwhelming. How long would I have to decide? There's no legal deadline, but practically speaking, every day you wait is another day that criminal activity continues. And if your father suspects you know something, he might take steps to protect himself that would make prosecution more difficult. After leaving Rodriguez's office, I walked aimlessly through New Haven, trying to process everything she'd told me. The spring afternoon was beautiful, flowers blooming, students studying on the green, couples holding hands as they walked to dinner. Normal life continuing around me while my world collapsed. I found myself at the Yale Art Gallery, standing in front of a painting I'd visited countless times over the past 4 years. It was a landscape by Hudson River School painter Thomas Cole, depicting a pristine wilderness scene that represented the American ideal of natural beauty and moral purity. Eleanor had brought me here during my freshman year, and we'd spent an hour discussing how art could inspire people to aspire to higher ideals. The beauty isn't just in the execution, she'd said. It's in the vision, the artist's belief that perfection is possible, that we can create something better than what currently exists. Standing there now, I realized that Eleanor had been trying to teach me something that went far beyond art appreciation. She'd been preparing me for exactly this moment. The choice between accepting a flawed reality and taking the difficult steps necessary to create something better. My phone buzzed with a text from Sarah. Dinner tonight? I feel like we haven't really talked in weeks. I stared at the message, knowing that accepting would mean either lying to someone I cared about or potentially dragging her into my family's nightmare. But I also knew that I needed to talk to someone who understood me, who could help me think through the impossible choice I was facing. I texted back, yes, but I need to tell you something important. That evening, sitting in Sarah's apartment off campus, I made a decision that would change both of our lives forever. I told her everything. Eleanor's hidden documents, my father's crimes, my meeting with the whistleblower attorney, and the impossible choice I was facing. Sarah listened without interruption, her expression growing more serious as I spoke. When I finished, she was quiet for a long time. My God, Robert, she finally said. I can't imagine how difficult this must be. What would you do? I asked. If it were your family? She was quiet again, staring out her apartment window at the campus where we'd fallen in love, built our future plans, and assumed life would follow a predictable path. I want to find a third option, she said finally. Some way to stop the criminal activity without destroying everyone I love. But I don't think that option exists. And I think you know that, or you wouldn't have gone to see a lawyer. She turned to look at me. Your grandmother trusted you with this because she believed you'd make the right choice, even if it was the hard choice. The right choice will destroy my parents' lives, and the wrong choice will destroy other people's lives, people who don't have any power to protect themselves. Sarah reached over and took my hand. I know this isn't what you want to hear, but you can't save everyone. All you can do is choose who you're willing to sacrifice, and make sure it's not the innocent people who are being hurt by your father's crimes. That night, I lay awake staring at the ceiling, Eleanor's pocket watch on the nightstand beside me. The inscription seemed to glow in the darkness. for integrity in business and character in life. For generations of Woodsons had carried this watch. 3 had honored what it represented. 1 had not. The question was, what kind of man did I want to be? Graduation day dawned gray and drizzly, matching my mood as I walked across campus in my cap and gown. My parents had driven up from Greenwich the night before, staying at their usual suite at the New Haven Hotel. We'd had dinner together, a surreal experience of making small talk about my future while I carried the weight of their criminal secrets. My father had seemed relaxed, even jovial, discussing my upcoming position at the firm and making jokes about how I'd probably start in the mailroom like he had. My mother fussed over my appearance and took dozens of photos, playing the proud parent while I wondered if this would be our last normal family meal. "I'm so proud of you, Bobby," she'd said, using my childhood nickname as she straightened my tie. 4 years at Yale, graduating summa cum laude, and a bright future ahead of you. Your grandmother would have been so happy. The mention of Eleanor had hit me like a physical blow. If only my mother knew that Eleanor's final gift to me was sitting in my dorm room, waiting for me to decide whether to use it. After the ceremony, we stood on the lawn outside Wolsey Hall, posing for family photos with my diploma. I watched my parents through the camera lens, my father's arm around my mother's waist, both of them beaming with pride and joy. They looked like any other successful family celebrating their child's achievement. The disconnect between appearance and reality was staggering. "We should head to lunch," my father said, checking his Rolex. "I made reservations at Maury's. Seemed appropriate for your last meal as a Yale student." As we walked across campus, my father pointed out buildings and told stories about his own Yale experience 30 years earlier. He'd been at my same residential college, had even dated a girl who lived in Sarah's current apartment building. The continuity of it all, Woodson men attending Yale, joining the family business, perpetuating the family legacy, had seemed natural and inevitable until now. "Dad," I said as we approached Maury's, "I've been thinking about my senior thesis research, about corporate ethics and international business." I felt my mother tense beside me, but my father's expression remained unchanged. "Oh, what about it? Some of the case studies I've read are pretty disturbing. Companies that seemed respectable on the surface, but were involved in serious criminal activity. It made me wonder how you've managed to keep Woodson Investments so clean over the years." My father stopped walking. When he turned to look at me, his eyes were sharp and assessing, the same look he got during difficult business negotiations. "Robert, why are you asking me this? I just want to understand how to avoid those kinds of problems when I join a firm. How do you make sure you're not inadvertently getting involved with corrupt partners or questionable deals? You trust your instincts, and you work with people you've known for years," he said carefully. "The business world can be complex, but if you maintain good relationships and do your due diligence, you can usually avoid problems. What about when due diligence isn't enough? What if you discover that a partner or client is involved in something illegal?" My mother had gone pale. "Robert, maybe we shouldn't discuss business on your graduation day." "It's fine, Victoria." My father's voice was controlled, but I could see the tension in his jaw. "Robert, if you ever discover illegal activity, you have a moral and legal obligation to distance yourself from it immediately. Any other course of action would be unacceptable." The hypocrisy was breathtaking. Here was my father lecturing me about moral and legal obligations while he was actively engaged in multiple criminal enterprises. Even if distancing yourself would cost you a lot of money or hurt people you care about, even then, some things are more important than money, son. Your integrity, your family's reputation, your ability to sleep at night. Those can't be bought or sold. I stared at him, this man who had raised me, who had taught me to ride a bike and throw a baseball, who had attended every one of my rowing meets and debate tournaments. How could someone who spoke so eloquently about integrity live such a fundamentally dishonest life? "I'm glad to hear you say that, Dad. It makes me feel better about the future." But as we sat down to lunch, I knew the future I was contemplating would destroy everything my father thought he was protecting. And for the first time since finding Eleanor's documents, I was certain that it was still the right thing to do. That afternoon, after my parents had returned to Greenwich, I sat in my empty dorm room with Sarah, surrounded by packed boxes and the detritus of 4 years of college life. On my desk was the envelope containing Eleanor's evidence, my laptop open to Margaret Rodriguez's contact information, and my phone, waiting for me to make the call that would change everything. "You're really going to do this?" Sarah said. It wasn't a question. "I have to. I've tried to find another way, but there isn't one. My father isn't going to stop, and every day I wait, more people get hurt." "What about your relationship with your parents? Even if they eventually understand why you did it, they'll never forgive you." "I've been thinking about that constantly. My parents had loved me, supported me, given me every advantage. They'd also built that comfortable life on a foundation of crime and deception. Which version of them was real? And which version did I owe my loyalty to?" Eleanor wrote that the people who love you will understand why you had to make the hard choice, even if it hurts them initially. Maybe she was right. Or maybe she was just hoping she was right. And if she was wrong, then I'll spend the rest of my life knowing I chose to protect strangers over my own family. I picked up Eleanor's pocket watch, feeling its familiar weight. But I'll also know I chose to stop being complicit in ongoing crimes. That has to count for something. Sarah leaned over and kissed me softly. "For what it's worth, I think you're making the right choice. It's not the easy choice, but it's the right one. Will you still feel that way when the media attention starts? When everyone knows you're dating the son of a criminal? We'll find out together." I picked up my phone and dialed Margaret Rodriguez's number. "Ms. Rodriguez, this is Robert Woodson. I'm ready to move forward." The next 3 weeks passed in a blur of legal meetings, document reviews, and careful planning. Rodriguez arranged a proffer session with federal prosecutors, who were indeed very interested in Eleanor's evidence and my additional research. The scope of my father's criminal activity was even broader than I'd realized. The investigation would likely expand to include several other major investment firms and foreign government officials. The hardest part was wearing the recording device during my final dinner with my parents before officially starting at Woodson Investments. Sitting across from them at our family dining table, making small talk while secretly recording their conversation, felt like the ultimate betrayal of everything I'd been raised to value. But when my father, relaxed by wine and celebrating my graduation, began bragging about a recent successful negotiation with Indonesian officials that I knew was actually a massive bribery scheme, I realized that the betrayal had been happening for years. Not by me, but to me, to our family's values, to the employees who trusted him, to the investors who believed in the company's integrity. 3 days later, federal agents executed search warrants on Woodson Investments' offices in New York, London, and Singapore simultaneously. By noon, the story was breaking on financial news networks. By evening, it was front-page news across the country. I watched the coverage from Sarah's apartment, seeing my father led away in handcuffs, my family's Greenwich mansion surrounded by news vans, our company's stock price collapsing in real time. The anchor described it as one of the largest international corruption scandals in recent history, involving decades of systematic fraud and bribery by one of Wall Street's most respected firms. My phone had been ringing constantly, reporters, family friends, classmates who'd recognized my name in the coverage. I'd turned it off hours ago, unable to face the conversations that would inevitably come. "Any regrets?" Sarah asked, sitting beside me on her couch as we watched my old life disintegrate on television. I thought about Eleanor's letter, about the trust she'd placed in me, about the choice between loyalty and justice that had seemed impossible just months ago. "Ask me again in a year," I said, "when we know how many people my father's crimes actually hurt, and when we see whether my parents can find a way to rebuild their lives. And if they can't forgive you." I pulled Eleanor's pocket watch from my pocket, reading the inscription once more. "Then I'll know the cost of integrity, and I'll decide whether it was worth paying." 6 months later, I received a letter forwarded through my lawyer. It was from my mother, written from the federal detention facility where she was awaiting sentencing on conspiracy charges. The handwriting was shaky, but the words were clear. "Bobby, I won't lie and say I understand why you did what you did. The pain of your betrayal is something I carry every day. But I've had a lot of time to think, and I've come to realize that the real betrayal happened long before you found those documents. Your father, And I betrayed you by building your life on lies. We betrayed Eleanor by ignoring her warnings. We betrayed the hundreds of people who trusted us with their money and their careers. And we betrayed ourselves by choosing comfort over character. You were the only one with the courage to stop the betrayals from continuing. I don't know if I'll ever be able to forgive you completely, but I know that what you did was right, even if it destroyed everything we thought we were protecting. Your grandmother would be proud. Love, Mom. I read the letter 3 times, tears streaming down my face, before carefully folding it and placing it in the box where I kept Eleanor's original documents. Someday, when the pain wasn't so fresh, I'd decide whether redemption was possible for all of us. But for now, it was enough to know that I'd honored the trust Eleanor had placed in me, and that the pocket watch I carried bore an inscription I could finally live up to for integrity in business and character in life. The inheritance Eleanor had really left me wasn't money or property. It was the choice to become the man she believed I could be. And despite everything it had cost, I knew I'd made the right choice, even if it was the hardest thing I'd ever done. If you like this story, leave your opinion in the comments and, of course, leave a like and subscribe. Turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any videos. Big hug and see you soon.